Okay, so I just want to thank everybody who is in attendance. Make sure you mute your computer so we don't get any feedback. So this is what I've done. I've put up, which is pretty interesting. It's kind of destiny that we were on the call with the peer reviewers from the Department of Education yesterday, and this was scheduled for today. So this does make a pretty big difference in relationship to one particular obligation. And if you notice, the DMI will not be due until like the second week in January. I sent that out. And the reason I sent it out is you'll actually see by the feedback we needed to add another section into that. So let's look at so this is directly from the peer reviewers. So if you look at the first part, it says entrance and exit procedures. It quotes the statute, and then it asks these questions. So does the SEA, which is the state education agency, describe how it will establish and implement, with timely and meaningful consultation with LEAs representing the geographic diversity of the state, standardized state entrance and exit procedures for English learners, including a description of how, if applicable, a state will ensure that local input included in the exit procedures, such as a teacher input and a portfolio, will be applied statewide? Does the SEA's description include an assurance that all students who may be English learners are assessed for such status within 30 days of enrollment in a school in the state? So these are the requirements. Pretty much anybody who's worked with English learners and Title III, you already know that these are requirements. So let's look at what the peer reviewers said. So there were 4 peer reviewers from all across the country, as well as the Department of Education Office of State School Support. So this was directly, they're quoting directly from our plan, which describes the extensive consultation that if you were on the Title III work group, you know that we actually started way ahead of everybody else in September of 2016. And then we did a survey that included almost 1,000 responses. Based on a variety of those respondents, we designed what the entrance and exit procedures would be. One of the issues was the way in which previously LEAs could choose whatever home language survey that they designed. Okay, so in the plan, we're very clear about a standardized form with particular questions that must be asked, and of course LEAs can add other things. Now the reason we're doing this is recently there have been discriminatory behaviors in relationship to the home language survey. In one instance, when a family enrolling a student put in the home language survey that their home language was English, and there was an assumption made by the secretary, for whatever reason, that this person was a Spanish speaker or whatever that was. And then that secretary went to the principal, and then the principal actually assessed the student without the permission of the parents. Okay. So to be clear, you can't do that, right? So we're going to have another very important WebEx meeting on the 20th with Provo Michelle Eldridge, who's worked on these issues because of the last 2014 federal audit and the way in which enrollment into schools have not been inclusive. So she has some really important work that they've actually implemented, which would make a difference for everybody. So if you look at the rest of it, remember these are the peer reviewers who are talking about the strengths and what we did in the actual plan. So the exit procedures are also standardized and are based on 2 elements. So one, and this has been established from the very, very beginning, but there wasn't much follow-up on the teacher-student-parent conference, especially in relationship to monitoring. So the student receives a composite score of 5 on the annual WIDA access for EL assessment. Number 1, the student receives the composite, and then a teacher-student-parent conference is held to discuss the necessary support that the student needs to make continuous progress. Now, there always was this idea of monitoring, but there was never a process and there was never anything that really supported that. So, again, the conference is held within 30 days of receiving the WIDA scores, the strengths, and if you look at the way it's organized, the peer reviewers then comment about the strengths. A comprehensive plan was developed to establish and implement a responsive English learner program and supports by a diverse group of stakeholders. The exit rubric is being developed with stakeholder input. So I actually sent out the rubric to several groups of people to get feedback on it so that it could be a very systematic way of, I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was looking at some data with people and there was a student who in 2016 had gotten a 5, a composite. But then when WIDA was recalibrated to focus on career and college, she ended up getting a 4, right? So then the question is, what kind of supports are going to be provided in relationship to the student who might have been reclassified under the old calibration of the previous WIDA assessment? So the piece that's important about that is that all those things, now that we have approval, will be on 2 websites. One will be the UEN website and also the Title III website on USBE. We haven't updated the USBE Title III website because we didn't want to keep changing in relationship to the kind of feedback we would be getting on the plan. Now remember, you can ask questions. The only problem is I'm trying to manipulate both computers at the same time. So, Jerry, are you looking at the chat room, by the way? Because I can't do both.
Yeah, there's no question.
Okay. Wave at me if you see a question. So the plan was developed through several meetings with appropriate stakeholders monitoring each year of the 4 years following being exited from the program. You see it has weaknesses. Well, there weren't any. So did the SEA meet all the requirements? And all 4 peer reviewers said yes. So this is a really good thing, especially considering that the amount of time that we met together with the ESS-EL work group, and then the feedback that we got on the surveys and the people who were on that committee. I just want to thank you personally. So let's look at the second requirement. So I'm hoping the people online are actually feeling good about this. Okay, so here's the next requirement. So monitoring and technical assistance, here there's the statute number. Does the SEA describe how it will monitor the progress of each eligible entity receiving Title III, Part A, subgrant in helping English learners achieve English language proficiency? Does the SEA describe the steps it will take to further assist eligible entities if the strategies funded under Title III are not effective, such as providing technical assistance and support and how to modify such strategies? Okay, so in the peer analysis, they're saying the state provides a detailed description of the comprehensive data review process it conducts. And now that we have the development of the EL data dashboard where you'll have access to it. You know, previously the access for LEAs
No, she just went away. No, she
was
just
not
came
as
back.
extensive, and it wasn't really that accessible on the data dashboard, and now we're working on developing that. So you'll be able to have access to the data for the reports from the annual monitoring tool. So the first component of the monitoring and continuous cycle includes schedules of on-site visits by the fiscal compliance officer and the Title III specialist Following this data review, each LEA revises and submits an annual improvement plan, and this is based on the statute. Ongoing technical assistance is provided through monthly interactive webinars and the focus that focus on policy processes to monitor the effectiveness of language programs. So we're going to actually look at this. One of the things that happens is when there are reimbursements, Sandy looks at them to see if the reimbursements, in fact, have the kind of evidence necessary to respond or to okay the reimbursement, and then I okay the reimbursement. So it goes through several levels. The new system that's going to be established in May, the Title III self-monitoring assessment tool, which is now the DMI, in the DMI, is going to be included in the application for funding. So this is how you'll be able to monitor your own progress, and we'll be able to support you more clearly. It says the state also describes the technical assistance it provides when growth goals are not met. Now, and this is what we use this because I had done this previously when we had AMAOs. So if you remember when you didn't meet the AMAOs 1, 2, and 3, the first one being growth toward language proficiency, the second one is reclassification, and the third one is academic achievement, growth toward academic achievement in the content area. Then I would send you a letter with the data in relationship to what the targets were for next year, and if you made it or not. So this is the same thing that will happen with the new established targets that now have been approved. Okay, so again, it says the plan is electronically monitored, and the reason it will be electronically monitored because there's a hard drive on the USBE data system, and it's Title III, it's monitoring, and every single LEA will have their own file folder in relationship to your annual improvement plan with evidence by year uploaded into that. So there won't be kind of this discontinuity of services provided, because if I'm not here and somebody else takes my place, and the federal programs people have access, as well as the deputy superintendent and the assistant superintendent over teaching and learning. This is Patty Norman, who works on this.
Here's a question.
Okay, so there's a question.
Will USBE and each district their growth targets? Or send each district their growth targets?
Yeah, we will. We have, so the reason you don't have them yet, the growth targets, because we have them in the plan, but the plan was never approved. Now that that section of the plan is approved in Title III, I can send them out to you. But we didn't send them out to you because it wasn't approved. And now that that section is approved, you'll be able to see it. Remember, we have 15 days to respond, not just to Title III, but to all the Title I issues, the Title II issues, McKinney-Vento, the migrant issues, the 4A issues. So all of those things, when we were on the conference call yesterday, those were addressed by the peer reviewers, and we had everybody in the room. We had Tiffany Stanley, and we had the federal programs people, and we had Darren, who's the new assessment assistant superintendent, and I was there. So as soon as we end up getting that section approved, but because Title III is already approved, I can send that out to you. Does that answer your question?
He says thank you.
You're welcome. Jerry and I are, Jerry's in the back and he's yelling at me, so that's why it's a little awkward. Okay, so, so this section, it says, look at the strengths. The state provides a well-thought-through, data-driven plan to monitor the progress of eligible entities. Based on feedback from LEAs, the state is revising the self-assessment tool to align with ESSA. So that's what we're doing now.
When USBE comes to our comes out to monitor our district federal patterns, are the schools expected to be implementing the ESSA plan?
Yes. So here's the question. The question is, when we come out to monitor, so the reason this is important, remember I'm giving you like until January to get that settled. And when we look at the monitoring plan, you can put in progress, you know, where you're actually assessing where you are. So we're trying to actually, because remember, ESSA is already, it's already the law of the land. I mean, that's kind of the point. The point is, though, that because it took them so long to review and approve the plan, then many of these things are in transition. So, for example, in Salt Lake, I think Salt Lake is kind of the first district that I'm going to go to. And we'll look at the monitoring plan, because it's another document that I had to adjust. But I sent the monitoring plan out a long time ago. And really the focus is on you, with me, working together to develop a time when I could come out based on your self-assessment tool and what you need help on. This is about common sense technical support. It's not like gotcha or anything like that. Okay, so just to make that really clear. So the strengths the state provides, I already said that, and then a self-assessment tool. So we already aligned the self-assessment tool, which is going to be used for monitoring, with ESSA. And that's the reason we did that. And we did it with the statute. We didn't do it with any kind of regulations. We did it with ESSA, the statute, and the plan. Okay, and if you look at it, it says providing details of what data to review and what would be included in the annual plans along with online professional development opportunities to support fiscal compliance. So one of the things we've done is, we developed a spending handbook to help people not be so confused about what supplement and supplant. Now, all these things, because now the plan is approved, they'll be available for you. But we're trying to provide all the technical assistance that supports you in ongoing evaluation of whether your programs are effective or not, and how you're using resources to ensure that students' progress is what drives the decisions you make. Now, the reason I'm saying this is the new grants management system is going to be connected to the finance system, where state legislators will have access to whether the funds are being used effectively so that student results are the consequence. One concrete example of this is because the K-3 reading initiative and the money that's provided for that has not made significant growth in student outcomes, the state legislature is now thinking about taking all that money and other grant monies and doing just a very large block grant. And that's coming up in the next legislative session. So we're trying to be proactive and supportive in relationship to providing the assistance to work with you. And if you notice, did the state education agency meet all the requirements? Well, all 4 peer reviewers said yes. Okay, I'm going to stop for a minute. Do you have any questions before I go on to the last one? Okay, here's a question.
Can you give us an idea of the documents that will be submitted, uploading to the DMI? Will this be specific documents or a form that we have compiled, or data that we have compiled?
Okay, first of all, the DMI. Okay, so it's the DMI is really, remember, that's going to go away because it's going to be in May. That'll be the tool that you use to actually apply for funding, right? So that's why I'm trying to prepare you. So you realize I'm trying to prepare you ahead of time. So the self-assessment monitoring tool is based on the statute, right? And it says, and I have it here that we're going to go over so it'll be clearer to you. It's currently in the DMI. Well, you download that, and then you fill it out the best that you can, and then you start gathering data and evidence. Some of the data you can't, well, you know, Anne Michelle sent you, I sent it out to you about where you can find all the data, right? It says, the title of it, says, how to find the data for the DMI, right? Based on the requirements for reporting, which now is the state requirement as well. So just to make sure you understand that the state accountability system is now aligned with Title III and Title I. Title III accountability for English learners is now in Title I, and it's also included in state accountability. Okay, so there's no divisions anymore. So everyone's accountable for English learners throughout the state. Okay, so those tools are very clear about examples of how you specifically want to meet the statute and the requirements, right? I mean, that's the whole point. The whole point is that every LEA has very different needs. The data dashboard that's being developed is all, I've met with all the data and statistics people and the assessment people, and when that is developed, then you'll have access to the reports from USBE that you will use. Okay, this is not supposed to put an undue burden on you trying to figure out how to get the data or where the data is, right? That's not the point. The point is it's our responsibility to provide the data that you need. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. Because we're going to go on further and you'll see how we adjusted it to provide more support. Okay, let's go on. So this is what they're asking. This is the one where all 4 peer reviewers said no. Now, there's going to be strengths in here, which we should be proud of. There's going to be weaknesses, and I've already addressed the weaknesses in the monitoring visits as well as the self-assessment tool, so that we don't get, like, you know, caught kind of flat-footed and behind. So I'm trying to provide that support for you. Okay, so here's what it's asking. It says, does the state education agency support for English learner progress, the statute, does the SEA describe how it will assist eligible entities in meeting the state-designated long-term goals for English language proficiency established under ESEA? Okay, so do you see that? Including measurements of interim progress towards meeting such goals. So we have a long-term state-designated goal for English learners attaining proficiency, including the measurements of interim progress, so annual targets, as we did previously in AMAOs, based on English language proficiency assessment under section whatever. Then it says, does the SEA describe how it will assist eligible entities in helping to ensure that English learners meet challenging state academic standards? Now, here's the point. The point is, if students aren't proficient in English and classroom environments aren't well scaffolded, then if you look at the gap in mathematics, ELA, and science in SAGE, English learners have the biggest gap, right? So we all know that, even below special ed students. So what they're asking is, sorry about this, it kind of jumped. So this is what they're asking. They're asking, how are we going to resolve this? Okay, so this is what the peers said. So these are kind of the strengths. The state established measures of interim progress toward meeting the state-designated long-term goals in language proficiency. Now, they were very clear that they wanted an ambitious goal in attaining English language proficiency. Now, typically, if you don't have all these different variables in relationship to students with interrupted formal education, refugee students, all these other issues, a very ambitious goal would be 3 years. Okay, we actually then said that because of all these different variables, it would be 5 to 7 years, but the ambitious goal is 3 years toward you know, a we to 5, as well as, you know, the school team saying that the students wouldn't be left behind if they were exited language programs for services. Now, and the reason we said that, so here's the other issue. And I'll just be as direct as I can. We actually can't have English learners coming into our school system and not attaining English proficiency for 10 years or 7 years, right? Because that means they don't have access to academic content, and as a consequence, they don't really have access to regular education of English speakers. And so this is also a civil rights issue. So pretty much, it's clear that we have to do something in relationship to the way we provide instruction for English learners. Some of the data, and I can show you this at another time when we did course taking patterns, students who come in at elementary school and have quality ELD instruction and support and access to grade level content end up, first of all, becoming English proficient either in grades 3, 4, 5, or 6. Based on that, they have access to more challenging courses. We've done data from university kids, low-income and EL kids who've matriculated and got 4-year scholarships to the Eccles Business School. And they end up having access to early college courses in high school. One criteria and thing that we should be shooting for is literacy in the home language and the biliteracy seal for students whose first language is other than English. So we have all these mechanisms in place. The question is, how are we going to maximize and strategize this? Well, part of it is learning from other LEAs who are doing great jobs. Alpine, even in the pilot year, ended up having 76 biliteracy seals, and 41 of those were native Spanish speakers. So the transition from being literate in your own language to being literate in English is really important. So that means, how do we engage families and parents to value their language? Okay, so they give us kudos for lots of things, goals, measurements, the can-do statements, the individual reports, the goals, the expected growth. Okay, now here are the strengths. Utah has developed both student-level goals and progress reports along with annual progress reports for schools and LEAs. The state is developing a transition plan for recently arrived ELs who enter high school and are at risk. The measures of interim progress in conjunction with annual progress reports provide necessary data to meet state challenging academic standards. Goals and plans for providing data in a transparent fashion in order to more quickly meet the needs of students. Okay, that's part of, the individual student reports that I must admit I'm very disappointed that some LEAs haven't really supported teachers in using these to redesign instruction. So I'll show you how we're actually going to do that, so all those lessons and units will be on the UEN webpage based on WIDA key uses connected to content literacy standards. I've done that for the last 2 years for school districts and particular schools. Okay, so this is the piece we have to pay attention to. Here are the weaknesses. Other than assessing students on state assessments and disaggregating the data by EL subgroup, there is minimal description of how a state will assist LEAs in helping to ensure that ELs meet challenging state academic standards. No date is provided for the long-term goal. 3 years is noted in the text. Well, actually, that's a mistake because Randy actually sent to me in the plan the long-term date for the goal, which is, the long-term goal is 2022. So question.
Our LEA doesn't receive Title III funds. We have done the DMI section that appear in our LEA profile. We do receive Title I funds and have requirements in doing the Title I section, please advise.
Okay, so the question is, if the people don't take Title III funds, are you, will you be monitored, and are you required for this? Okay, so I'll just say, and they do take Title I funds. So you do remember that state accountability is now for EL. So in Title I accountability, you are going to be accountable anyway for growth and progress that English learners make. That's one thing. The visiting in particular is in relationship to those who take Title III funds as supplemental support for what has to be provided for English learners based on the way in which you fund support for English learners, right? So ultimately the question is, okay, so if the feds come and they want to, monitor Title III, they'll pick districts that take Title III funds. They'll do that, right? But the other question is, if you're monitored with Title I and you're a school that's designated as being in the lowest percent for turnaround schools aligned to the state accountability system, it could be for English learners. So ultimately, you'll probably have to decide the kind of support that you need if you get into school improvement and if you're for targeted support and comprehensive support. Because all of these things are now aligned. Turnaround schools, state accountability, Title I, all those things are aligned. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the question for you is, how can you actually do the best job for English learners now that every LEA and school is accountable if you have 10 English learners in your school? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Okay, so let's look at the weaknesses. Other than assessing...
You guys should know this, but do we have the documents we're reviewing?
Well, first of all, so the question is, should you have the documents you're reviewing? Okay, we just got this yesterday, so you can't possibly have the documents because they just sent it to us, right? I'll send it out to you so you can see it. All these other documents that I'm going to show you, you've had the draft versions of them, but now those versions have been revised based on this feedback that we got yesterday. Okay, so here's the weakness. So the SEA did not describe how it will assist, and then it says, so what do we have to do? This is what we have to do. If no, describe the specific information or clarification that the SEA must provide to fully meet this requirement. So I've already started this, and we only have 15 days to respond. So you're going to be probably the first people in the entire state who've seen the feedback from the Department of Education, and the only people who will see how we're going to remediate what they say. So the state should, 1, provide a description of the supports available for LEAs in schools to provide academic content and instruction in English language arts, mathematics, and science to ensure that English language learners meet challenging state academic standards. The state must provide a date for the long-term goal. Add long-term goal year to Exhibit 19. So Randy has already done this because the long-term goal year is 2022. Second, what we have to do is describe how it will assist LEAs in meeting the state-designed long-term goals for English language proficiency. Okay, so you see what we have to do? Okay, we're going to take just a minute, and then I'm going to switch documents so you can see how the visits are redesigned to actually support you. Oh, sorry, that's not it. I'm trying to make this larger, Jerry. I'm having a hard time here. There we go. How's that? Okay. So I sent this out a very long time ago, I think in September. And the reason I redesigned the way in which visits would happen is previously it was just this whole kind of compliance issue and not really supporting you. The whole goal of a monitoring visit, as I did with Park City, and we're using kind of the Park City model, is for the focus to be on programmatic issues. And the way you do that is when you fill out the self-monitoring tool, you fill out all the evidence that supports what you're doing. And if you're in progress of addressing those issues, then you just put IP, that you're in the progress of doing that, right? I mean, that's really the point. It's supposed to be ongoing evaluation of your programs. And the reason this is important is the state legislature has been very clear, again, that if they're funding programs and there aren't student outcomes that are increased, then that funding is going to be taken away. Now, the reason that's important is that using funds for the same programs that produce the same results without evaluating the effectiveness of the programs doesn't really help. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide that kind of assistance. So if you look at the way it's organized, it's based on the state plan. The LEA monitoring is based on the ESSA state plan. It's a description of the supports and technical assistance. So the point I'm making is that this is on us. It's USBE's responsibility to try to provide the kind of support that you need to do the best possible job. That's really the point. It's nothing about gotcha. It's not about compliance. It's about ongoing annual improvement based on the targets related to growth in English language proficiency and growth toward proficiency in English language arts, mathematics, and science. Okay, so the purposes, again, is quality support and feedback through technical assistance for effective evaluation of your programs. Is to learn from LEAs the successes for English learners, refugee, and immigrant students, so we can disseminate them, highlight them. The other thing is there is a provision in the new ESSA law, which we've agreed to do here, is that if there is a set aside, and sometimes it happens because charters, new charters and other charters don't meet the $10,000 threshold and they waive their funds. Doesn't mean that they're not accountable for their English learners, but they just waive the supplemental funding. As a consequence of that, we have the opportunity, based on the LEAs that are making progress, to make monetary awards to support and disseminate the kind of practices that you do. I'll give you one concrete example. At the high school in Park City, they have a course called Content Link. The Content Link course is supported in a block with English learners. For example, I was in a chemistry class. So the chemistry teacher, an English language arts writing teacher who focuses on academic writing to prepare them for college, and then an ELD specialist. It's one of the best classes I've ever seen, and I interviewed the kids afterward who are actually going to college. And they attributed their success to the way in which secondary education in Park City has been organized. Okay, here's a question.
Thanks for the feedback. We have actually done the Title III self-assessment for our own purpose. I was just making sure we didn't have to send it in and do the PMI Title III section and miss something we were required to do. Sounds like we're doing what we need to do as long as we're serving students with EL appropriately with Title I and school programs. Thanks for clarifying and your training and your help.
Well, yeah, so someone just said that they were thankful for the help, and they're using the self-monitoring tool in a very particular way as it's aligned to Title I, which I think is a really good, it's a good practice for everybody. Charter schools, you know, whether they, whether they actually take Title III money or not, using this self-assessment tool will really help them do the right thing for kids. That's kind of the point. And whoever said thank you back. Okay, so let's look at the criteria for the visits. I don't know if you remember this, but previously, before I came, they used to do like rotating visits. And I actually changed the criteria, which is if there's an LEA with schools that haven't met their annual growth targets toward the long-term goals, or the long-term goals in English language arts, mathematics, and science, then they would have priority, right? I mean, you see the logic of this. When you don't want people who are struggling or who haven't met their targets then not be supported, right? So instead of this 5-year rotating basis, okay, that's not really helpful. The other criteria is that LEAs that have an increased percentage of either immigrant students, refugees, and students with interrupted formal education, because their needs are really strategic and they're very different in relationship to some social emotional issues for students. And in collaboration with the counseling department and ed equity department, on Wednesday or Tuesday, I did a session on mindfulness practices and neuroscience in helping reduce stress reduction and student anxiety. So we're trying to work on, all of these things together so we don't have students and families living in poverty or being disenfranchised because they're refugees. I mean, that's really the point. And LEAs that have made significant progress. And the reason we would look at that, again, is that we can give monetary awards and provide for your district and your superintendent to put on your webpage, yes, you've been honored because you have, 75 students who were awarded the biliteracy seal. We want to really, and I made this recommendation to the board when I did a presentation last month and said, let's work on recognizing and disseminating really amazing practices that are happening throughout the state in, different districts, in rural districts, as well as urban districts. So here's the pre-visit preparation. So it's review the LEA's electronic portfolio and the self-assessment monitoring tool, which I've combined in everything. So it's the annual improvement plan, the data for meeting the annual targets and long-term goals, which we'll provide in relationship to math, science, and language arts. And it's what you're going to be submitting in the grants management system anyway. So it's not like redundant. If you're applying for Title III funding, then you're going to do this anyway because it's a part of the new grants management system. Okay, so I'm not going to go over this because we'll go over that on the monitoring system. And I'm just going to give you an example, then we're going to go to the monitoring system and how I changed it based on ESSA. So here's the visitation process. The monitoring visit will be organized by the LEA leadership and the USBE specialists based on a K-12 feeder pattern with the highest number of English learners enrolled. So you see the logic of this. The logic is the feeder pattern, if in course-taking patterns, elementary schools, aren't effective in relationship to supporting students becoming English proficient at least by the 5th grade or the 6th grade or the 4th grade, then the kids' access to academic grade level content is diminished. That's really the point, you see? Based on that, then, it's like following the students from their elementary schools to their middle schools and then to their high schools. This is an example of things that we've seen when we've analyzed course-taking patterns. One of the most significant early college access for English learners and low-income kids is not only being working and becoming English proficient in elementary school. But being really supported with academically rigorous, challenging courses in middle and high school. There are English learners, when I've made visits, who are in high school, and I'm doing a lot of focus groups with high schools throughout the state with students. And one of the things they say that is shaming them is teachers come up to them, particularly in high school, and they say, well, you don't have to do this because this is too hard for you. Now, okay, so this is not good. The role of the teacher is to scaffold instruction so that kids, are enabled to do rigorous work. Same thing with counselors who won't give refugee students access to driver's education because it'll be too hard for them. Okay, so all these requirements for challenging classes, you're going to have to analyze. The board has been very clear about the underrepresented students in early college courses. So if you look at it, we have classroom visits will be conducted by USBE content specialists in English language development, sheltered instruction, and mathematics, science, and English language arts. Now, the reason we're focusing on classroom observations, and this is not judgmental, this is providing feedback. This is what I did at Park City. I went to all the elementary schools, went to the middle schools, went to the high school, spent a lot of, almost a whole day in the high school. And then the timeline is the commendations and findings will be submitted to the LEA within a week of the visit. So, the team gets together, they say, this is what I saw, this was really great instruction. So commendations, because you want to get feedback on what you're doing right, and you want to do more of that in schools. And then in response to the findings, the LEA will have 30 days to respond to the findings with concrete actions integrated into their annual improvement plan and submitted to the Title III specialist. Because the ongoing improvement plan, there's a requirement by statute, will be the way in which you apply for funding. So if you're updating it all the time, then it'll be a way for you to monitor your progress in relationship to, the students that you're working with. Here's a question.
Will the visits be after the WIDA access?
Okay, so it says will the visits be after the WIDA access? No, they won't be after the WIDA access. So the reason they won't be is because I can't, so I'll just give you an example. An example is Salt Lake. So I'm meeting with the people in Salt Lake. We're going to do it probably in February. We'll plan it based on the criteria, and then we'll bring the team out and visit, and then we'll send the report. Because remember, the whole point is this year's data is the baseline. So in some ways, the people that I'm going to be visiting this year, and of course Park City because they did it last year, they have in some ways an advantage because you're going to actually see that you can't compare 2016 WIDA data with 2017. And so this will be really helpful for them to really see how they can hone in on the kind of support that they're providing for each of their schools, especially in a feeder pattern. Okay, so additional supports. So based on the response to findings, additional support will be provided by monthly webinars by content specialists in sheltered instruction for mathematics, science, English language arts, and available on, so Title III is going to have a new YouTube channel, and it'll be easy to get to. And so the focus this year is going to be on science because of the newly adopted standards. Okay. And also, the monthly webinars, you'll be able to the teachers will be able to sign up on it on Midas. So that'll end up, and if you want to talk about developing like micro-credentials to add to their portfolio evaluation, I think it's a really good idea because we can do that now with Midas. So if they attend the webinars and they're logged in, then it's easy to produce a micro-credential for the work that they've actually done, and they can add that onto their teacher licensing. So here, the statewide support that's coordinated through agency-wide collaboratives. And I'm not sure that you know that all these groups exist. So the first one is the Cross-Department Literacy Collaborative. So I'm on that collaborative in relationship to supporting English learners. And this is the group that's trying to figure out the way in which they're making literacy a priority for a wide range of students, especially English learners and students, minority students, and all the disaggregated groups, and how that's presented to the legislature in relationship to funding. And the board, actually, this month, Jennifer Thronson and her team, plus the finance and data people, presented scenarios based on what a literacy block grant would look like. The second one is Cross-Department Implementation Team for Mathematics. So we're focusing on an ed equity component of mathematics and trying to really think about highlighting exceptional practices of teachers who are really supporting students in making mathematics comprehensible based on the redesign of their instruction. Then, of course, you know this one, the Early College Committee. This is mandated by the board because of the underrepresented students in early college courses in high school. The USB Refugee Collaborative and community-based agencies. We work on these problems in relationship to civil rights issues for refugees, and we work on them with all the resettlement agencies. And then we have the Professional Learning Community Committee with institutions of higher education, which has been started out of the Title II funding. And then we're beginning to update the UEN website with open educational resources for differentiated lesson designs in content areas based on the new WIDA key uses. So I've done this kind of professional development, and it's still available with instructional coaches in Jordan, with instructional coaches in different districts as well as schools. And then the UEN refugee website with all the resources for educators, students, and parents in multiple languages. We also have translated the home language survey, the annual report to parents, and the opt-out form in 7 languages. We've gotten lots of feedback from ALS directors and refugee agencies, and those will be available when we redesign the USBE website. On this website, we also have spoken and audio files in different languages, which is the refugee website. And the last thing, again, is to focus on UEN is hosting the web-based differentiated unit plans based on sheltered instruction strategies based on the key uses. So the professional learning will develop this as a tool that will be available for all LEAs to use as support systems in the content areas. Okay, questions before I do the last? We have about 5 minutes to do the last part of the self-assessment tool to show you how I've changed it based on the ESSA requirements. Questions? Okay, so this should look familiar because it's uploaded to the DMI, right? And then you download it and you fill it in and then you upload it again. And remember, you have an electronic copy with all your support mechanisms, so you won't have, like, when I first came in 2 years ago into this role, all I saw were huge binders of LEAs that had been monitored, districts that had been monitored, and then no continuity, like, at all. So the electronic portfolio, remember, there's a hard drive on the student advocacy services under Title III, under monitoring. Every single LEA has their own file folder by years so that you can upload, so all of the stuff that you submit to the DMI, those, and the people who've already done it, they're in that file. And when you do it every May, when you're applying for Title III funds, that'll be also uploaded into your electronic portfolio here, and then you'll be able to keep it there. So the feds decide, oh, they're going to have a spot check monitoring visit. You won't have to be running around trying to put all kinds of documents together. That's really the point. Okay, so if you look how this is organized, again, it gives you the statute, the actual law. Then it's whether it was reviewed by USBE, yes or no. All the sources, you just list the sources of evidence. Please list the documents submitted by the LEA as evidence, including data on meeting annual targets and annual accountability letters. Now remember, we're providing this for you. It's not like you have to run around to try to find the data. So that's the piece that's important. And then you assess yourself. So NC is not compliant, then the LEA must explain how they will remediate non-compliance and ask for support. In progress, not applicable. And the reason the not applicable is there is because some LEAs are not eligible for immigrant funding because it's based on a formula related to significant increase of immigrants in your district, which was approved by the in the monitoring. I don't know why this keeps happening. Okay, there we go. Okay, now, most of it is pretty, you've seen it, you know what it is, you know why it's based on the law. Talks about classroom teachers, it talks about quality instructors. The other issue, which the disproportionate number of underqualified teachers teaching English learners. Okay, not a good thing. It's a violation of civil rights law. So, and I've actually put the civil rights law in here so you can monitor yourself, right? Because one thing you don't want ever to happen is someone going to the Office of Civil Rights and, submitting a complaint, and then you have no evidence for the work that you're doing. And if you don't know what the civil rights law is, you're really open to that and open to litigation. This is about reporting, so that'll be on the data dashboard. The students who have exited. So it's I try to make it as clear as possible. And if you notice the reporting as described, it's described in the actual statute, but we've also added the number and percentage of EL learners who have not attained proficiency within 5 years of initial classification. Now, the reason we're doing that is to give you, to give you a warning signal. So the question is, you have kids who have been in the system and they still aren't English proficient after 5 years. So what are we gonna do to help them? That's really the point. This is a section on additional civil rights law. The additional state data is the number of students awarded the biliteracy seal is supported by the Utah State Board of Education rule. So we've added the rule in there, and then the additional civil rights data is the number and percentage of ELs exited who've successfully taken college preparatory classes. This is a civil rights issue, and this is also the USBE strategic plan for college access. So these are ways that you can gather the data and see how you can improve. And then this is about monitoring, so pretty much how you're going to monitor the kids after they've exited. Again, the 10 issues related to civil rights. And then the next one And the point about this is, it's good, you don't have to, I've made it so that you don't have to put specific evidence. You just say that you're compliant or that you're working on it. Because again, this is protecting you in relationship to complaints from the Office of Civil Rights. So question?
All the needed information for number 8, reporting sections currently available in dashboard. If so, which dashboard?
Okay, first of all, remember, the dashboard hasn't been developed. All the data that's there is accessible in the document that Ann Michelle sent you about how to locate the data, and I'll send it out to you again. So she sent out everything to show you how to actually find where the data are. It's not in the dashboard yet. It will be next year because we're developing all the reporting in a dashboard for you to have access to it. Okay, so this is about immigrant children, and some of you don't have that, so you'd put NA in there. Okay. Now, I've tried to make the annual program evaluation and how you align resources to ensure increased student outcomes really simple. So I took part of the UCA and the federal law and state requirements and put it into something that you would just use a narrative. So if you look at it, it says, the annual improvement plan is identified in ESSA as a local plan. The local plan will be used as a report provided by the LEA and shall be used by the LEA and the SEA for improvement programs. This comes directly from the statute. Here's the question. Does the annual improvement plan, ESSA reporting requirement for program evaluation, include a description of the programs and activities conducted by the LEA with the funds received and how such programs and activities supplemented programs primarily funded by state and local funds? Now, the reason this is important is, remember, this is about using supplemental funds for requirements to ensure that English learners have the same kind of equitable access for a high-quality instructional program as every other student who is a native English speaker. Okay? So that's the reason that's important. So it says, explain how your LEA is using the student data to evaluate the effectiveness of your language instruction program. So you're explaining how you're using the data, right, to evaluate whether your program is effective or not. If you're not meeting your annual goal, if your students aren't meeting your annual goals, then you have to go back and look at and ask questions about why is that. So this includes a description of your model for instruction. Now you notice we're not mandating a model. We're expecting that you would know how to meet your needs of your students and your community. So a description of your model for instruction and the curriculum materials that you use as a supplement to local and state funding. Okay, now the model for instruction is a description. It's not about listing curriculum like, oh, we do PSYOP. Okay, so that's not a description of your model. If you have met annual growth targets for English language proficiency, and if not, what you plan to do to meet those targets. Okay, and then the next part is, which is the last one, an explanation of how you allocate resources to individual schools to impact the school's increased academic achievement for English learners in mathematics, English language arts, and science. This includes the specific schools that did not meet the interim goals in ELs and accountability. Please explain how you're going to support them. Now, the reason this is important is it'll give districts and schools, and this is a model that Provo uses incredibly effectively, how you're going to allocate resources in relationship to the needs of students at levels of English proficiency. If you have a level 1, and this report again was asked for by Provo, which we provided last year and which we'll provide again, those annual targets for students at grade level for every school, because accountability is focused on the school level, not just on the district. So this gives you an opportunity to really think about and use the Provo model and see, okay, well, this school, wow, every single level 1 kid made their annual progress. Every single, level 4 kid is now moving to level, becoming proficient. You see, we're trying to provide the scaffold experience for you to use the best practices that are happening in your actual district. There are classrooms where classroom teachers are making a huge difference with English learners. Well, how is the school learning from them? Like, how is the administrator and the PLC work learning from the teachers who are making the most progress with ELs, and how are you learning together? This is supposed to be functioning as a way in which PLCs work significantly at the grade level. Otherwise, it's using funds and allocating them to schools the way you've always done, and as a consequence, never examining why it's not working, and you're not meeting growth goals for students, right? We're trying to provide the support where you can highlight the best practices in your own districts, in your own schools, at your own grade level, and learn together from that. Okay, so that's the last piece. Any questions before? And remember, I'm going to send all this out to you, especially since we just got the feedback from the feds yesterday. So here's another question.
There are not clear directions for how to determine percentage of students not meeting English proficiency within 5 years, 8.2.5. Did you have Ann Michelle clarify which report or where in Aspire SIS you can find the information?
Okay, so I'm just going to say this again. And Michelle, I don't know. I have to actually look. So I'm going to put up what she sent out. It's called How to Locate Necessary Data for the Annual Improvement Plan for English Learner State Accountability. Okay, so I'm going to send this out again to everybody because it's based on all the requirements in the plan. It tells you how to locate that data. Okay, is that the last question? Okay, thanks everybody. You can always email me. And my suggestion is you'll be on a list for monitoring, but if you want me to monitor, if you want the team to monitor you sooner than later, it probably would be better for you. Okay, take care. Have a great holiday.